Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and today we're reviewing for you Vindication, a game by Orange Nebula and Mark Needlinger. Now, before we get started, I will say this will be a usual review by us where there's theme, a little bit of a game overview, but if you want to jump forward to the 6 considerations as to whether this might be a game for you, please use the timestamps in the description below. And one final thing, what you're looking at is the original base game of Vindication, but we do own the new giant box called Vindication Archive of the Ancients. You'll see a couple of components that are from this new big box, but for the most part we've stripped it back to its base game for this review, and we'll point out the other elements as we go along. But now let's get into it.
So in Vindication, we find ourselves washed ashore, having been thrown overboard for being a wretched, guilt-ridden scumbag. Luckily, a traveler has rescued us and they've become our ally. Now, it's our job throughout the game to gain different attributes and leverage our ally and potentially gain other allies to increase our knowledge, strength, wisdom, and hopefully become vindicated along the way, but also gain a lot of honor. And at the end of the game, whoever has the most honor will be the winner.
Now, as promised, I told you I'd point out a couple of the deluxe elements that we're using, only things that really help us demonstrate the game a little better. The first is obviously we have a neoprene mat, which is an exact replica of the board that is contained in the base game. We have a game tray, which is actually part of the new archive that makes it easier for players to set up, but also it makes it a little bit easier for us to demonstrate, as well as this little board that shows the 4 key actions that are available to you on your turn. And again, this just helps us demonstrate, but it's not part of the base game. So let's talk through how this works. So you are washed up ashore on the edges of this new world, and you can see there are starting positions around the board that are dictated by a journey card that you draw at random at the start of the game. That's going to give you not only your starting position, but also the companion from one of the 3 different colored companion decks that you start with, the person that has helped revive you, but also they're going to have some kind of power that you're going to be able to leverage throughout the game. So it gives you a good starting point. Now, to get the game going, wherever we start on the board, we reveal tiles, but new tiles are constructed around the board as we move through, not on the tiles, but between the tiles in these spots. As we stop in a new position, these new tiles are going to be revealed, and therefore the playing board is very modular. So in fact, one of the key actions available to you on your turn is to move, and you have to move at least 1 step on your turn. And that would count as my first action. The other 3 actions I'll explain briefly, but one of them is to visit the areas that are surrounding you. So if I had moved here, we would bring out another new tile, and then I could pick one of those tiles that are adjacent to me in order to go and visit it. Now, when you go and visit these different tiles, they all give you different things in the game. They're going to allow you to get a lot of things done, but one of the key things that you're trying to do in this game is you are trying to collect different types of attributes. And interestingly, on the board, there are 3 primary colors. So there are blue, red, and yellow, and you each start with 1 attribute of that color, which is shown by the little cube of influence that you have placed there. But interestingly, there are these harder attributes to earn: the green, the purple, and the orange. I'm not going to refer to them as their thematic names because I never remember. But in order to create, for example, a green, you need to mix, as you would if you're mixing paint, yellow and blue together to create 1 green. So I would have to spend 1 yellow and 1 blue to create 1 green. And thereby it's creating this cube puzzle where you need to mix and match different colors in order to get the resources that you need throughout the game. And why do you need these different resources? Well, you usually need 2 of that attribute in order to gain 1 of the cards, either the card that's shown face up or the one from the top of the deck. And you want to gain these for 2 reasons. 1, you want to collect companions because they're going to give you a character that you can activate to get more attributes and special powers in the game. You want to be able to go and fight monsters, which is the orange area. You You want to be able to get personality traits from the green area, which give you honor points, but they also allow ongoing benefits throughout the game, and relics, which are like items that have special powers that you're going to be able to use again to get things done in the game. The second reason why you want these cards is because at the end of the game, there is going to be points handed out for the person who has the majority of each of that card type. So you're creating a tableau in front of you that's going to have different colored cards. And at the end of the game, if I had the most yellow, then I'm going to get this yellow token worth 5 points. It's a mastery token. However, there's a little thing that mixes this up. Whenever you have 3 cubes in one of these areas, as an optional action on your turn, you can spend those 3 to get one of these proficiency tokens. They cost 3 cubes, but they're going to give you an extra boost of 2 in that color that's going to help you vie for majority to get those mastery tokens. So I've talked about getting attributes out onto the board, onto these 6 different colored areas. And the way that you're going to do that for the most part is by activating yourself or your companion. So imagine that this blue character was my starting companion. So I had it sitting here. And the way that I would activate this companion is to place a cube from my influence onto that, and it tells me what it's going to give me in return. So I have the option of activating its power, but the main reason why I want to do this is because it's going to give me 2 blue cubes. Now, I haven't even spoken about the cubes, but this is a really core part of the game. So at the start of the game, you have 2 conviction, you've got 8 influence, and 8 potential. Now, a key part of this game is augmentation, which is moving these cubes from left to right. You want conviction because it's the most powerful version of these cubes, where it's going to help you in the area control game, where you get to place your cubes out onto different areas of the map, and that's going to give you victory points along the way. And they can also help you do things like an empowered draw, when instead of drawing from the top of the deck, you actually get to draw 3 from the top of the deck and then choose between the one available and the other 3. So you get this really powerful way of mitigating luck in this game. Or you can stop your companion from dying if you have a bad roll. You can spend conviction so your companion doesn't die out in the battlefield. But then influence is also really important, because influence is the main pool of cubes where you're going to be moving them out into these colored areas. But in order to gain influence, you need to get your potential into influence. And so a big part of this game is realizing your potential and being able to be vindicated. And to do that, you need to empty all of your potential into influence, so move it all up, and you need to have at least 25 on the honor track or the victory point track. And at that point, you get to stop being wretched, you get to become vindicated, which gives you victory points, but also the ability to activate for more cubes. So 3 of the 4 core actions I've talked about. We've moved, we know how to activate a companion, and we use one of the actions to visit somewhere we've been, or we can rest and simply move a cube from left to right. The final available main action is really an expansion to the game called your Guild Favor, which is this token that has many uses throughout the game. You can use it to slyly take full control over an area, or to place it on one of these spots on the board so that when someone moves through it, you get bonus honor. There are many different ways you can use this, including to move cubes from left to right, and it just acts as another little wild action that you can use throughout the game. The game is highly variable. It's not just the setup of the tiles that is randomized, but also all of the tiles, the little expansions that come with the base game do add other elements. So you can see that in this game we've got Ronak, which is set up, which is this semi-cooperative game where you all want to contribute to battling Ronak that occurs sometime throughout the game. Then we've got these monuments that we're trying to construct as well by having a presence in each of the attributes on the board, as well as 2 different proficiencies. And so you can really customize your experience of this game. The final thing that I want to point out about playing this this game is that the end game is triggered in a really unique way. At the start of the game, there are 2 end game triggers that are drawn from the end game trigger deck. So for example, this one says when all players have been vindicated, or this one says when 2 proficiencies more than the number of players have been acquired. That triggers the end game, which means you'll finish that round and then there'll be one more round of the game. But the interesting thing is that as people earn honor, they are going to be going past these markers and collecting these tokens. Whenever one of these tokens is collected by the first player to go past it, we draw another end game trigger, and it's a way of speeding up the game, but also means that one could be drawn that immediately triggers the end game. So you have to be watching where people are at in terms of the honor track. So that's a basic overview of some of the elements in the game, but we'll talk more about how we felt about some of the more specific things as we talk through our review of the game. So we have 6 different considerations as to why you might enjoy this game. And the reason why we're doing the review this way is because this was a really interesting game for us. It was really hard for us to articulate what we were thinking about this game, because there were elements about it that we really liked and other things that were making it kind of land a bit flatter. And so it took us a lot of discussion, and we came up with these 6 elements of not necessarily things that are good or bad about the game, but definitely things that take into account personal preference. And so we wanted to really talk about these things so that you would know if you'd like this game.
So let's talk about theme first. So this is one of those games where I first saw it, I was like, oh no, is this going to be like fantasy heavy? I don't know if I'm going to be into it. But the reality of it is it's, you know, there's a little bit of like fantasy characters and a monster here and there and kind of the locations, but it's not an overly thematic game in that sense. I feel like the main theme of it really is that whole core vindication storyline of you individually trying to go like fulfill your potential and kind of prove it to everyone that yes, absolutely,
I was like, good all along.
I'm not a wretched, guilt-ridden scumbag. I am a respectable human being that deserves to have all the honor.
But that setup is so fantastic, and all of our friends absolutely love that setup as well. Just telling them that, hey, you are a wretched person, a guilt-ridden scumbag, which it says on the tile, and your ultimate goal is really to become a respectable human being, which it also says on the tile. I think that dichotomy of good versus evil, of like leaning into the evil things that you can do in this game versus trying to build up your honor and be seen as a respectable person, that is just such a very like universal thing.
It's a really fun theme to communicate as you're kind of setting up like for the setup of, why you're trying to do what you're trying to do. Beyond that though, and I do enjoy that, then it kind of creates a little bit of that banter of like, yes, I've become vindicated, or I'm so close, or like, but beyond that, all the other aspects, like as you saw on the board, like you've got all these different colors and they're all meant to represent something else, like knowledge and wisdom and strength. But when you're actually playing it, it doesn't really feel like any of those things. Like it just feels like it's just these different color levers that I'm trying to optimize for different reasons because they're my currency. It is the things that I want to achieve.
It's a cube pushing puzzle at its core, and even when you're playing it, you're thinking about how to exchange 2 cubes for 2 cubes somewhere else, and so it doesn't really feel like, oh yes, I've gained strength and therefore I can go out and battle. I didn't feel like those pieces really came together. For me, that's not a bad thing. I felt like it had enough thematic setup, but if you're looking for a game that really brings you into the story, that makes you feel like you are discovering new things as you move into this new world that you've decided is your home, I don't think it delivers on that experience.
Well, I feel like it delivers the discovery because every time you're kind of uncovering the tiles in a different location.
But it doesn't feel like the tiles they're just actions that you're revealing.
And it's like, hey, you get the you get to get the red cubes from this.
You get the red cubes.
It's like, oh, here's where you get to swap your green cubes for the kind. So that ends up being the puzzle itself ends up being fairly like just abstract in a way.
I feel like there were little elements that when we were playing the game where Maggie was like, that makes no sense. Okay. Why am I getting more honor for that?
Well, it was more like things like the scumbag. It's like, I love that the bag that you draw tiles from is called the scumbag. It's just like, there's a cute joke of like, oh, the scumbag, grab the scumbag and get the scumbag. But it's like, why is this a scumbag? Like, the stuff that's coming out is just the land. Like,
and then we had a full argument of, well, what would the bag be thematically? Anyway, so I think it's a really nice social element calling it the scumbag, because every time my friend who was in control of the bag was placing tiles out, I kept going, hey, scumbag.
But that's just because you enjoyed, calling him a scumbag. I think. But it's like, it didn't add, if anything, it sort of distracted me thematically from like, what are we, like, but again, like, I get the joke, like, it's a cute little, like, it's kind of like someone went, wouldn't it be funny if the bag is called scumbag? It's like, yeah! And then it's like, well,
I appreciate the humor. I also appreciate the little bits of humor that are throughout the rule book. I did like that, the publisher feels like a little bit tongue-in-cheek around the taking the theme too seriously. So I actually really enjoyed that. But there are some curious elements around the thematic tie-in, like the fact that, you are playing this area control game, and when you take control of an area, you're gaining honor, and then when someone wants to use your area, you are basically getting more honor, and it feels a little strange because there are some moments of conflict where you actually benefit from a honor perspective, and so for me it did like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Like, it's interesting because it's like, there's traits, for example, or even alliances that duck honor from you. So for example, there's like, whenever there's usually negative interaction, so there's a greed trait, I think from memory, where you kind of get to sort of do a negative thing towards another player, and that actually costs you honor.
Makes sense.
Which makes sense. But then it's kind of like if you kind of overtaking someone else's like territory, now I own it, and they're like, yeah, okay, that's cool, that's great, you should get honor for that. It's like, wait, so who's like, the honor is based on who's got the standard, whose perception of the honor. Regardless of that, overall, is this an overly thematic game? No, but the core seed of the setup of the theme, I enjoyed. The whole personal vindication story is fun.
The second element of this game that you may or may not like is the high degree of customization. So there is variability in the game setup in the fact that these tiles are being revealed in a random way across the map, and maybe the thing you need, it happens to land all the way on the other side of the map, so you've got to get over there. And I haven't spoken about the fact that you can increase your number of steps that you're able to go, but maybe that means you're having to move around the map because randomly the two things that you need are at polar opposite ends of this map. So that's one element of variability.
But also I think it's the types of tiles that you decide are going to go into that bag, and it's almost like what little modules or what little options will you even have? Are we going to have the wishing well, which means that, when we discover it, there's going to be little goodies that you can get from there? Or are we going to have the crystals, which means that we can then craft these, jewels or gems and things like that?
Yeah, so the game comes with more tiles than what you need for any individual game, and you have to mix and match and decide what goes into the bag, and therefore what's going to be part of the considerations of the strategy in the game. And for me, this is a bit of a neutral point, because from one hand, I really, really like that you can ultimately create and customize a game that works for your particular gaming group. And the wishing well is a great example, because I feel like it's not a super powerful tile. And a lot of groups may be like, that's useless, I don't care about that, because what it does is it brings out these little bonuses that go into the well. But thematically, our friends just really latched onto that. They're like, ooh, I'm going to go visit the wishing well. And, if you've got friends that really get into, like, ooh, I'm going to go shopping at the wishing well. That was really a really fun element. And so it became a mainstay in the tiles that we would include. However, for me, the negative of so much customization is that it felt like there were suboptimal games where we were trying to work out what worked for our group. And because there were things in there that we didn't really like, or that...
you were like, that didn't really add that much, or that was just more of a distraction, or we never really got around to doing that. There was never like a...
or I tried that out and I felt like it didn't pay off for me. And whether that's your perception or an actual element of that component of the game, it doesn't really matter, because you're ultimately trying to create a game where everybody feels feels like everything that's included is worthwhile and fun. And also that's the same thing with all of the different expansions. So I won't even get into all of the different expansion boxes, which we also have. But the ones that come with the base game, there are still a lot of different components that you can add in.
Yeah, it's like, are we going to add in the monument? Are we going to add in the central monster? Are we going to add in all these sort of different things? And so I often find that when a game is too modular, and I know there's several other games that are like that, I don't end up overall then feeling all that invested with the game itself, because it's kind of like I have an identity crisis with, like, what's this game even meant to be?
What is the base game?
Who are you? Like, what? And so I tend to, like, when I'm connecting with a game, I kind of prefer it when a game is like, this is the game, this is the core thing that you're like, this is our offer, this is like the absolute best experience of this game. And then you might have an expansion that comes up down the track that shifts things a little bit. But when the game at its core is meant to be quite modular, I personally, and again, it's personal preference, I just find that I'm like, so I don't connect with it as well.
I'm a bit neutral. It just took me a few games to find what worked for me, and so that's, I don't know, it kind of, the negative outweigh, it's kind of the same. It's the same. It's neutral. Okay. Everybody knows what neutral means. It's neutral for me. The third element that I want to talk about is luck. And so in this game, there are a couple of elements of luck. One is the fact that you either get the choice to take the card that's available to you in a zone, or draw the top card from the deck. Now, of course, if you're drawing blind, there's always luck involved, but there is a way to mitigate that. And I feel as though if you're using conviction in order to be able to take the top 3 cards, as well as that card to choose between 4 cards, that luck is pretty much mitigated. You're getting to choose, and therefore I feel like if you're willing to take the top card, then that's your choice.
There's also dice rolling when you go into the monsters. When you're battling monsters, you're going to be rolling 2 dice. One of them is going to determine if your ally is going to be taking any damage, or potentially they're going to die, in which case it's up to you to decide, am I going to save them? I'm going to spend my hard-earned conviction to get them out of trouble. And then you always get to you get to roll the kind of the bonus die of, like, when you've gone there, what's your goodie that you're going to get, in addition to the points that you're going to get. So with that, I feel like even though there's the risk of losing an ally,
or tiring them out, which is also annoying.
You're still kind of you're never really going home empty-handed, because you still get to get the victory points for taking on the monster. So
and you get a bonus. But the thing is that you can choose to make monsters a part of your strategy, and therefore you are opting into that element of luck. If that is not for you, you don't like the thought of potentially losing your companions, don't fight monsters. And I feel like that is kind of removed. And also I feel philosophically that, like, if you are battling, then there is a degree of luck in things going
be
right
100%
or wrong.
certain.
For the most part, you benefit either way. So it's not like you don't gain anything from going to the monster, and you do get that bonus. But I will say that I believe after Rado's feedback when this game originally came out, he did not like the blank that allowed you to get away with battling and have no negative consequence, because maybe someone just happens to never get a negative consequence and go on this battling rampage. And so there is a new version of both of these dice used for battles that comes with an expansion. But for the most part, I feel like you're opting into the luck, and therefore you reap what you sow if you decide to go out and be maybe, a little battle heavy.
So overall for me, the luck wasn't something that I was annoyed by, because it does feel like it's a small-ish kind of element. A lot of other things you can kind of mitigate for. So and
it's a tick for me on luck.
That's fine for me as well.
Now, on that point about whether you choose to go after monsters, in this game, you can completely ignore one strategy, and I really like that about the game. There is a variability in strategy where you can go trait strong or relic strong, or maybe you just get a whole heap of companions, or maybe you're just going after your monument, and it feels like everybody is doing something slightly different, and that is something that we really like in games.
I always like being able to, like, every game kind of focus on a different thing, and sort of get to see how the game plays out with that strategy or that avenue. So that's a tick for me.
Tick for me. Now, the next point is highly personal preference. So some people love evaluating all the cards available to them, reading about all their unique powers, comboing them in their tableau in a way that is interesting and makes sense and feeds off each other. And those people are not us.
We're not like that.
We are not like that.
I am very lazy when it comes to card reading. I'm just like, it's just too, I think that's why I'm attracted to Euros, where it's just very clear what's the action that happens here, here, there. And if you have to read a card, it's usually like something here or there, and it's just very quick. But when you're like, you have all of these options, and it's like, what was that one again? And what's that one over there?
Yeah.
And then when you start adding some of the other modules that have like, when you come up to this level, you can exchange this for others. Like, there's too much to keep track of.
There's too many things going on with these cards.
Don't have
and
that
also,
kind of bandwidth in my mind.
the shape of the board means that there's always some cards that are upside down to you as well. So you're having to ask people, can you read that one over there to me? Or can I just pick this up and read what that is? And then I inevitably forget which card I was going after.
Like with the pets, you have the menagerie where you have all the possible pets, and it's like, and you have like a display of them. It's like every time you either completely forget, I completely forget what's there, or it's like, can you read all of them again to me? And it's like,
or you just ignore them completely because it's too much cognitive processing.
But that's a very personal thing.
But for me, that is something I don't like about the game, but it's something that I don't like about any games that involve a lot of card reading. But other people and a lot of our friends play this, and they're like, oh, this and this working together is so fantastic, and have you read what this person does?
Like, no,
and it's
I
just
have
super
not.
exciting, and they get into the lore and the fact that I found this relic that's really powerful for these reasons, and for us, we're just like, just tell me what it does. And like, what would allow me to accomplish? Exactly. So the last point is around something that is super interesting to me mechanically, which is the way that this game ends. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there are end game triggers that are randomized at the start of the game. There are 2 of them. And then as you move past these different markers on the victory point track, we are adding in other triggers to the end game, which means if someone's getting away with the game and earning lots of points, it's more likely that the game will come to a conclusion quicker. Now, this is something that I just found fascinating because I've never seen it before. And so from that perspective, from the novelty perspective, I was like, that is really cool.
It's a very intriguing proposition of having this game that is so potentially in flux, and that's probably not the right word, but it's like it's so volatile. It's like it could at any point...
At any point, someone could go past one of these markers and end game.
It's already been met. That condition has already been met.
So the game is over.
Yeah, one round done.
Yeah, so you have to keep an eye on those end game tokens that are going to trigger a new card. And then once you have a bit more knowledge about what those cards could potentially be, you might be able to think, well, if that card comes up, this game is over. And so I need to be thinking about that. But the most interesting thing about this variability is the length of game.
Yes.
Because some of the end game triggers are really easily achieved. For example, this one, when all players have reached Vindication, which most people are really trying to do in this game. Or this one's pretty easily met as well, which is around collecting these proficiencies, which if you have the Monuments expansion in the game, everybody wants to try and get those as well. So that can really speed up the game. And then there are some that just take forever. So then there are some that are just like,
never happen.
We are never going to make that happen because it's very niche in its strategy.
We had games like that where it's like, we were feeling like the game is ending too soon, so maybe let's just, make sure that we don't trigger it. And it ended up being like a 2+ hour game after some of the games might only last
less than an hour.
Yeah, 45 minutes.
Yeah, so it's
very inconsistent.
Inconsistent. And while I found it novel and interesting, ultimately it's probably not to my player preference because of the fact that I like to know exactly how much time I have left to get something done. So whether that's someone, the game trigger ends at a certain number of victory points and I can see someone approaching that, or whether it's a set number of rounds. So if I think about something like Feast Road and I've got 7 rounds and I need to get X, Y, and Z done, and that puts pressure on me. Whereas this is like, I could be working towards something long term and then the game gets cut short, or alternatively, I could be doing really well and then the game trigger just won't come. And like, I've set myself up and then ultimately everybody else catches up, and that frustrates me as well.
It makes it very hard. And so it kind of affects one of the other pluses that we had of the whole, like, you get to try different strategies. Because sometimes it's like, well, a strategy that you might be trying may not then become viable if randomly you end up getting some of these end game triggers that just cut the game too short, or
so you have to take into account what the end game triggers are in building your strategy, but also sometimes you might want to manipulate these, and there are cards that allow you to add new ones or remove them or do different things, but for the most part I feel like it adds some variability that I don't love.
Yeah, so it's almost like, and this is a strange one, because it's like, would you then like house rule a way of going, well, maybe we'll only play with these ones because we know that these are going to lead to a medium length game, or if you do enjoy that volatility and that not knowing and having to adapt, then yeah, great. Like, you literally don't know if you're sitting down for for a 45-minute game or a 2-hour game, then yeah, that's great. I think for me, because one of the things that I enjoy about gaming is almost like my relationship to the game and getting to know it, and it's almost like I kind of need the game to be a bit more consistent so that I can try different aspects of it and go, oh, this is what happens with, this aspect or that aspect. So that's why that one, even though I agree with you, it was an intriguing concept or proposition. Overall, it's a bit of a down for me. It's like no, I wouldn't want that volatility.
So as you can see, there's a few things that each of us individually like and then like a little bit less about this game. But before we get to our rating, in terms of player count, I actually enjoyed it at all different player counts for different reasons. So at the full player count, 4 or 5 people, like more people around the table, there's a lot more interaction on the board. And if you're including the guild little tokens, there are lots of ways that you can kind of mess with each other in a little mild way. You're blocking people's spaces that they want to get to. So there is far more interaction, and I found that really fun.
Yeah.
But the game does, get drawn out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because everybody's doing quite a lot of things on their turn. So there's a little bit of downtime while you're waiting for it to come back to yourself. And actually at 2 players, I really enjoyed it because it was so snappy.
Yeah, it goes by really, really quickly, and you get to kind of go, oh, okay, great, again, my turn, and what are we doing?
Yeah, so we can get through a game in like 45 minutes for Maggie and I and just explore different strategies and things.
Yeah.
So I think it is actually quite good at a 2-player count, even though there's not a lot of scaling for 2 players. So I liked it at all player counts.
Yeah.
And so now to our ratings. For me, this is, in spite of some of the things that we've said, I feel like this is a really solid game, and I can completely appreciate why some people love this game so much. But for me, there's a couple of personal preference elements that's holding it back a little bit, and that is not a reflection of the game, just a reflection of my style. And for me, this game is still great. I would sit down and play it with you anytime. It's a 7.7 for me.
Okay, yeah, so for me, I would agree in that I think the bones of it, the construction of it, it's a solid game. But for my own personal preference, it's not, again, it has those little things that I'm like, do I connect with it as much? Yes and no. So for that reason, it's a 7.5 for me.
And a final note about whether you need the giant box, the Archive of the Ancients, I would say try the game in its base form first, because in the base game, there is so much variability as it is. There's so much to explore in there. And most of our time has been spent pulling things in and out from that base game experience. And then there's so much more that's added, but I don't feel like all of the other expansions fundamentally change the core game. They are just adding more options for you,
it's
to
like little
add in.
mini modules of, like, you now have this other track, or you have this little mini quest that you can do over there. You can so.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our review of Vindication. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.